The morning of October 16th, 1793, dawned grey and heavy over Paris. The cold mist hung low across the cobblestone streets, muffling the distant clatter of carriage wheels and the whispers of a restless crowd. Inside the walls of the Conciergerie prison, a woman once known as the Queen of France sat on a wooden stool, her body frail, her hair shorn short and grey before its time. This was Marie Antoinette, once adorned in silks, diamonds, and powdered glory, now reduced to rags, accused of treason by the very people who once cheered her coronation. But the story of her final hours, the truth of her brutal execution, is far darker and more haunting than the history books dare to tell. It's easy to picture the Queen as a distant figure, arrogant, spoiled, detached from the struggles of her people. "Let them eat cake," they said, she mocked. But what if that was never her voice? What if the woman walking to the guillotine that morning was not the cold-hearted villain history painted, but a tragic symbol of a world collapsing in fire and fury? The night before her execution, Marie Antoinette was denied sleep. Guards stood by her cell, their whispers sharp and unkind. Her children had been torn from her arms months ago. Her husband, King Louis XVI, had already met the blade of the guillotine earlier that year. Alone, she faced the terror of her own ending. Her once elegant hands trembled as she tried to write a final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elisabeth. The ink smeared as tears fell upon the page. "I am calm," she wrote, "as one may be when conscience reproaches nothing. Farewell, my kind and tender sister. May this letter reach you. Think of me always." When the dawn light seeped through the iron bars, she rose quietly, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. She dressed in a simple white chemise, the same color worn by countless victims before her. Gone were the gowns of Versailles, this was the costume of death. As she stepped into the corridor, the guards shackled her hands, though her wrists bore marks from weeks of confinement. Unlike Louis, she would not be granted the dignity of a closed carriage. No, the revolution had saved its deepest cruelty for the Queen. At 10 o'clock, the cell doors opened. Outside waited an open wooden cart, the tumbril, the same crude vehicle that carried criminals to their deaths. The crowd had already begun to gather, thousands pressing into the narrow streets of Paris. Some shouted curses, others jeered, but a few, mostly women, watched in stunned silence. They had come not just to see a queen die, but to see the end of a world. As Marie was led out, she stumbled slightly, the chains clinking against her ankles. Her hair, once golden, had turned ashen white during her imprisonment. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, bound her hands tightly behind her back. She winced but said nothing. Her face was pale, her lips bloodless, yet there was still something regal in the way she lifted her head, refusing to weep before her enemies. The cart began its slow roll toward the Place de la Révolution, the same square where her husband's blood had stained the ground. The journey took nearly an hour. Along the way, vendors shouted, dogs barked, and children threw mud. But some accounts say that even the jeers grew quieter as the people saw the Queen's composure. She did not cry out nor beg for mercy. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, whispering prayers beneath her breath. One eyewitness, the journalist Jacques Hébert, wrote that she looked like a statue of suffering, still carrying the air of majesty even in ruin. Another, a seamstress named Rosalie Lamolière, who had served her in prison, claimed Marie whispered, "Courage, courage. My end will come soon, and I will find peace." When the cart finally reached the square, the crowd surged like a living sea. The guillotine loomed above them, a dark wooden frame against the pale sky, its blade gleaming with cold precision. The executioner's assistants prepared the scaffold, while soldiers pushed back the mob. Drums rolled. The air thickened with the scent of sweat and smoke. Marie Antoinette descended from the cart with effort, her bound hands making balance nearly impossible. She tripped on the step, and as she fell forward, her foot brushed against the executioner's shoe. Her voice, soft but steady, broke the silence. "Pardon me, monsieur," she said. "I did not do it on purpose." Those would be her final words. Even in death, she carried the manners of a queen. As she was led up the wooden stairs, the crowd erupted again, some cheering, others weeping. A cold wind blew through her thin garments. Her hair was tied back to expose her neck, and she was fastened to the plank beneath the blade. For a brief moment, her eyes lifted toward the sky, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in defiance. Then, with a single motion, the blade fell. The sound, sharp, metallic, and final, cut through the roar of the crowd. Silence followed, then a wave of cries and cheers. Her head was held aloft by the executioner for all to see, and a shout went up, "Vive la République!" But the story didn't end there. What came after was more chilling than anyone expected. Witnesses later wrote that the execution was not as quick or as clean as it seemed. Some claimed the first fall of the blade only partially severed her neck, and the executioner had to adjust it, blood streaming down the plank. Others said her lips moved for several seconds after the blade fell, a macabre legend that spread through Paris like wildfire. True or not, it haunted those who saw it for years. Her body, stripped of all dignity, was thrown into a common grave, no coffin, no ceremony. Lime was poured over her remains to speed decay. The woman who once ruled the most powerful court in Europe vanished into the earth like any other victim of the revolution. Yet even then, she refused to be forgotten. Decades later, when the monarchy was restored, her remains and those of Louis XVI were exhumed and reburied in the royal necropolis at Saint-Denis. There, among the kings and queens of France, her tomb now rests, simple, serene, almost peaceful. But her ghost lingers in every retelling, not as a villain, but as a warning. Because Marie Antoinette's death wasn't just the end of a queen, it was the symbol of an age consumed by rage, fear, and vengeance. She became the scapegoat for centuries of corruption and privilege, the human sacrifice for a people demanding justice. But in their thirst for retribution, they forgot mercy. And that's the tragedy history often hides, the woman behind the crown. Before she was queen, she was a 15-year-old girl from Austria, sent away from her mother, forced into a loveless marriage, trapped in a court that despised her foreign accent and envied her beauty. She was never trained to rule, never taught to understand the suffering of her people. The palace at Versailles was a golden cage, and every mistake she made echoed across a nation on the edge of collapse. Her spending became legend, the diamonds, the dresses, the parties. But few speak of her acts of charity, her efforts to adopt poor children, her private donations to hospitals, or her letters begging the king to reform the tax system. The world saw her smile and assumed arrogance, when in truth, it was the mask of a woman trying desperately to survive a world of men who despised her. In the end, her beauty faded, her power crumbled, and the mob she once waved to from gilded balconies became her executioners. Yet her final act, that quiet apology to the man who would kill her, revealed something deeper than the historians ever imagined. It showed grace, humanity, dignity in the face of annihilation. The revolution promised liberty, equality, fraternity. But that day in October, the crowd's cheers carried something else, the sound of vengeance disguised as justice. And as her blood soaked into the Parisian earth, the nation that killed its queen soon found itself devouring its own. Robespierre, Danton, Desmoulins, the architects of the revolution, would all follow her to the same blade, swallowed by the same fury they unleashed. History has a cruel symmetry, so when you hear the name Marie Antoinette, remember not just the silk gowns and glittering chandeliers of Versailles, remember the pale woman standing on a rickety cart, facing death with quiet courage. Remember the lies told about her, the mob that cheered her death, and the world that forgot her humanity until it was too late. Her story is not just a relic of the past, it's a mirror held up to every society that turns its anger into violence, every crowd that confuses justice with revenge. Marie Antoinette's last walk through Paris reminds us of one haunting truth. When humanity loses compassion, every revolution becomes its own executioner. And if her ghost could speak today, perhaps she would not beg for pity, but whisper this: do not let your rage make you blind. Remember me and remember what your hatred can destroy.